Thank you very much, Kylie, and thank you everyone. It's wonderful to be here. As Kylie indicated, I work for the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. I'm sitting next to my boss, Archbishop Prowse, as the chairperson for the Commission for Evangelisation, Laity and Ministry. I'm the director for the office, the National Centre for Evangelisation. And Khalid, who is a colleague of mine, we work under the same commission, has invited me along. And my experience in this area is minimal, but it is an area of interest to us in our network of evangelisation leaders and communities and parishes around the country. We've recently shared in our newsletter a number of articles on seasonal workers and migrant workers because we want to encourage our network to consider the pastoral care of migrant workers and seasonal workers as part of their mission in the church. So it's really great for me to be here and listen to everyone over the next 2 days. So thank you, Father Khalid, and I'm looking forward to facilitating this session. So this morning we've had a great introduction, and this panel is really looking to continue that narrative of looking at what is happening and why is it happening. What are we doing? And we have three different perspectives on that this morning. So the first is more of an international perspective from Ambassador Porro, who I'll introduce each speaker a little bit later. We have a perspective from the Church in Australia, from Archbishop Prowse, and we have a perspective from the government, particularly from the Palm, Mission of Palm in Australia as well, that Cary and Fiona will share with us. So it's really about collecting and building this map of what's happening and why we're doing what we're doing. So the process for this session is quite simple. Each person will be given a period of time to share their thoughts and reflections from their perspective. And after each talk, I'm going to invite you just to take a minute of silence to really think about and soak up what has been said. Often at conferences we're talked at a lot, and it's a lot to try and soak up. So after each talk, I'm just going to allow a minute for you really to think about what have you heard, how does it impact what you're doing, and what's coming from that. Is there a question or an action that you're hearing come through as you reflect on the input? So we'll have a minute between each sort of presentation to reflect. And then at the conclusion of all of the presentations, we've got a period of time for questions and a dialogue within this space. And that dialogue can happen via the microphones, but if you have questions that you'd like to put in the Padlet as well for this session, feel free to ask some questions or make comments in the Padlet. We used that platform about a month ago for one of our own conferences, and it was just wonderful to share and see insights coming from different perspectives. We all write notes in our pads and we take them home and keep them ourselves. So Padlet's an opportunity to share your insights, what you're seeing, with everyone else in the room. So I encourage you to use that platform as well. So that's a bit of an outline of how we're going to approach this session. We've all had our cup of coffee and something to eat, so we're looking forward to getting into this next space. So first of all, we're going to hear from Ambassador Porro. The Ambassador is a career diplomat, and she joined the Department of Foreign Affairs in 2009. She's held a range of positions in Canberra and overseas as well, including placements in New Caledonia, West Africa and India. And in August 2020, she presented her credentials to the Holy Father as Australia's ambassador to the Vatican. She has degrees in diplomacy as well as politics, philosophy and economics. And having met her, she's a very impressive lady and is doing great work as our ambassador to the Vatican, and really has gained some unique insights. I'd like to invite and introduce our next speaker, Archbishop Christopher Prowse, who is the Archbishop of Canberra and Goulburn. But nationally, he's the chairperson of the Commission for Evangelisation, Laity and Ministry, but also the delegate for migrant and refugees within the Commission. it's his area to advise Laity lead and all the work of the Bishops' Conference in this space. Archbishop Prowse was previously a bishop in Sale Diocese and an auxiliary bishop here in Melbourne, and has family here in Melbourne, so it's always nice, I know, for him to come down and see his family. But his roles go well beyond that. He's also the Apostolic Administrator of the Military Ordinariate in Australia, and he has been a member of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue and consultor for the religious relations with the Jews at the Vatican as well. So he's very well experienced and has a lot of time in seeing a bigger picture of the world, but being based in Canberra, some of the politics that happens in Australia as well. So he's a great man with a great vision around this, so I'm looking forward to hearing him speak and share this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. With an introduction like that, I feel I've got to say something really profound, which I'm not really. I'm just going to make a few comments on pastoral and ethical issues coming from our Catholic heritage, and was delighted with Dr. Berg's input this morning to give us the legal background to what's happening in Australia. And then, of course, Ambassador Porro gives us the understanding as an ambassador what's happening in the diplomatic world internationally. But my interface with seasonal workers really began when I was the Bishop of Sale, that's Gippsland, the eastern part of Victoria. And it was like a bit of a subculture. Often I would celebrate the Mass at the Cathedral on a Saturday evening at Sale, and well, generally right at the back of the church would come in seasonal workers, which I found out they were seasonal workers later on. You knew pretty much straight away that they were for three reasons. First of all, they were always shivering cold because most of them were from Oceania or Timor-Leste or Papua New Guinea. And tell you what, on a Saturday night at this time of the year in Sale, it's pretty cool. Secondly, English was a second language, possibly a third language. So there was difficulties too in comprehending our English, especially the way people in Gippsland talk in an Australian accent. And that's not to be underestimated. Third one, unbelievable Catholic piety shown. Really religious people on their knees praying in a heartfelt way, knowing that God was with them, although in many times they feel God abandoned them. And after speaking to them, after Mass briefly, they then got in a bus and off they went. I always wanted to engage a lot more with them and invite them over for a cup of teas and coffee, but that was never possible because they had to get back to the agricultural estates where in the area where they were. I noticed a number of people here from the Ballarat, Mildura, Leeton area too, and that's another big agricultural area in this part of Victoria. I'd like to pay tribute straight away to the immense number of religious women, religious men and religious women, and wonderful lay people that I met and have met over the years who walk alongside our seasonal workers. They act as interpreters, they walk alongside them to where they can get assistance, practical help with clothing, even English classes, all those sorts of basic things that are part of our humanity that we take for granted. And I know there's a number of you here today. So if you don't mind, on behalf of all of us in the Australian Catholic Church, wonderful work. Thank you so much. And you're often understated and unknown. So talk about another subculture. When I was in Sale Diocese, there was a Good Samaritan convent nearby, and the sisters there, this was one of their major apostolates, and there was one particular sister there that she was forever, when I was talking to her, talking about the seasonal workers and different situations they will find themselves. And I'd like us to take a lead from her book, is that she did a lot with advocacy via her elected representatives politically. So the state and federal government elected representatives in her area. And she did a tremendous amount of work there with them on mediation, linkages, all the sorts of things that Dr. Berg was saying, but just the helping hand, but too technical, but we take them to the wonderful people from the legal point of view to assist them. Then when I was transferred to Canberra, and then found myself walking up and down corridors of political power, and then introduced myself and all the rest of it. Very often, not all the time, but very often, the local members would say about the religious sisters or brothers or wonderful lay people who were advocating on behalf, many times on migrant and refugee issues with them, and they took them very, very seriously. I know sometimes we can be very dismissive of our elected government officials, but the ones I met, I can assure you, they were taking them very seriously, mainly because the Good Samaritan sisters were forever on the telephone to them. It's a bit like the person in the Bible. Look, she's driving me crazy, but I've got to give her what her wants so I can get on with other business. So well done, and it is heard. So I'd also like to pay tribute. And what you're talking about, Dr. Berg, there's a great, obviously, cooperation happening with the government, and I think that needs to be encouraged. For myself personally, I find that I can see Jesus very much in seasonal workers. And I just met some wonderful seasonal workers there at morning tea time. They're from, about 8 of you from East Timor. And Jamie, I met you. Now, Jamie, I'm going to tell a little bit about your story, but you might want to come up and just say a little word. I don't want to talk on your behalf. Would you be kind enough just to come forward? There you are. We've got the biggest smile in East Timor. Come down, Jamie. And... for those that don't know, 98% of people in East Timor are Catholic, and the other 2% are lying. Jamie, you spoke very beautifully, so... thank you, very kind. Would you just mind sitting here for a moment? Thank you so much, you're very kind. You're at Werribee, is that right?
Yes.
So what sort of work are you doing at Werribee, you and your friends?
Okay, me and my friends, every day we work like as a farmer. We work like cutting broccoli and cauliflower every day. And then we start at 6 o'clock in the morning. Maybe finish like 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But if in summertime, maybe we work 7 days. Yeah.
You were telling me at morning tea, at the moment cutting broccoli and cauliflower down at Werribee, it's a bit on the icy side, so what do you have to do before you start cutting?
It's happened last week. We start at 6 o'clock, and then once we are going to the pedicle that we work, once we cut the cauliflower or broccoli, we have to, because all the leaves, a lot of ice on the top, and then we have to make it down and then we cut it. It's the experience that I faced.
Well, that's not the experience you have in Timor-Leste, getting rid of the ice, unless you're up in the hills, they say, huh? Your family, tell us about something very important happened with you just before you left to come here.
Okay, it's very sad for me. Once I come to Australia, I leave my wife and my kid. Once I come, like my kid born in the morning, 23 of March, and then I came here 24 of March. Yeah, it's very sad for me, but I have no choice. I have to come because of life. I have to come and work for them, for my family.
Congratulations on becoming a father. You said, I have no choice. I have to come here for my family. Could you explain a bit more what that means?
Like in my family, I'm like the oldest son in my family, because my father passed away last year. Because I take over all the things from my family, I have to work to come to Australia and work for my family, so that I can provide them like a food or the needs that my family need.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm sorry I gave you no warning. I gave you no warning because I thought you might say no. So, thank you very much. We really appreciate that. And they're very, very happy because Pope Francis is not visiting Australia in September. He's visiting East Timor, and they're very, very happy about that. So that's great. You know, everybody, that's what it's all about. If you're walking with people that are marginalised, for God's sake, make sure their voice is heard. I know that sometimes we Aussies are great talkers, but talking and walking Mouth and hands and feet together is so important. So clearly I don't need to say that to you people because you committed your whole life to that. But that's something that in our Catholic social teaching and in our teachings of the bishops over the years, and here in Australia and Oceania, they've been talking. I mean, I'll just give you an example of this. Is way back from the United States in the 1970s, but people cross international borders for seasonal work, for temporary work, and for permanent resettlement. In all too many cases, human considerations such as family life, family values, are sacrificed to economic ones. That's a typical one. Then I've always enjoyed this quote, just a few sentences from Pope St. John Paul II on his encyclical Laborem Exercens on work. He says, "The most important thing is that the person working away from his native land, whether as a permanent emigrant or as a seasonal worker, should not be placed at a disadvantage in comparison to other workers in that society in the matter of working rights." Take a bow, Dr. Berg. Emigration in search of work must in no way become an opportunity for financial or social exploitation. All these circumstances should categorically give way after special qualifications have, of course, been taken into consideration. Here it is, everybody, to the fundamental value of work, which is bound up with the dignity of the human person. There it is, the dignity of the human. There we move to the ethical issue, foundational rock from which we respond. Every person has a dignity beyond compare. For Christians, that's given a different and even a deeper dimension because we say Christians through baptisms are made in the image and likeness of Jesus. Not everybody's a Christian, but everybody can certainly say that everybody has a fundamental right to proper work conditions because of the fact that they are a human person. Once more, the fundamental principle must be repeated. The hierarchy of values and the profound meaning of work itself require, here it is, that capital should be at the service of labour and not labour at the service of capital. And that is a quintessential Catholic principle on matters of work which have a direct implication here in seasonal workers. I'm going to finish now with simply I'll go back to the wonderful nun there, Samaritan nun in Sale area. Her favourite scripture text was Luke chapter 10, and she, being a good Samaritan sister, it's the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. Remember that one? A man injured on the side of the road, two people walk past, busy with other things, walk around him, and then a person, most unlikely, who was not part of his religious or social background and didn't know at all, went straight to him and helped him and took him to a hospital, paid the bills, and walked with him. When the nuns over the years have referred to why they are involved in this, they've always referred to this beautiful passage, and one of the nuns said she calls it the by chance parable, because it says that on Luke chapter 10 verse 30. Now by chance someone was going down, and it's by chance that we're here today and tomorrow, by chance. And God's got something very special planned for each one of us, so that we can not so much go like that, but we can go like this, hands out, heart open, and bringing a humanity into an area that is so often very inhumane. I conclude with the Gospels on our 5 fingers, because this whole building is called the Mother Teresa of Calcutta building, and she lived, when she came to Melbourne, she just lived around the corner, and the missionaries and charity sisters are still around the corner from here. And she said, you've got the whole Christian's mandate for service of those on the periphery. You've got it on your 5 fingers. Here it is. You did it to me. You did it to me. So when we meet Jesus face to face, he'll say, I was a seasonal worker and you helped me. You did it to me. Amen.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. Again, so many wise words. I might just give you a minute to just reflect on that. And again, what is it you heard? How does it impact what you're doing? And is there a question or an action that comes from the wisdom? Thank you. Thank you very much for that time of reflection. So our next panellist speakers are from an organisation we heard referred to a few times this morning, PALM, which is the Pacific Australian Labour Mobility. So we have with us Miss Cary Duffy, who is the Director for Worker Support Strategy, and Miss Fiona Nitschke, who is the Director for Worker Support, both within PALM's delivery branch, which is part of the Pacific Labour Operation Division of the Australian Government of Employment and Workplace Relations. If you caught all of that. If you didn't, it's on page 14. But like all organisations, there's lots of titles and structures, but there are also those who work with their heart to really support people. So I'd like to invite up Cary and Fiona to share with us a little bit about their work.
That on first, hopefully you can hear me. In giving you the best chance to hear me, I apologise in advance for my voice. I've had a bit of an itchy throat for the last couple of days. Can I start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the ground we're meeting on today, the Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their ongoing connection to this land, and also extend that respect to any Pacific Island or Timor-Leste elders with us today. Can I also thank the organisers for inviting us to present to you, to share some of the key objectives of the PALM scheme, and also I'll talk through some of the recent changes we've made to the scheme, or some of the recent changes this government has asked us to make to the PALM scheme. And then I'll hand over to Fiona, who will cover our approach to worker support and some of the priorities that we're currently working through, and also answer some questions that you have. We'll both be around during the breaks and again tomorrow morning, and so please come and introduce yourself and tell us about your involvement and concerns with the PALM program. So, beautiful, thank you, Don. The PALM scheme's objectives. So the scheme has a number of objectives, including recognising the mutual interests of all the participants in the scheme, and that includes, the workers, the employers, the critical friends, and the employers of the scheme. Some of those objectives are complementary, and some of those are common, and some of those are a bit more give and take. The scheme also has an objective to address workforce shortages in Australia. That's how it came about, with a small pilot about 12 years ago, a very small pilot looking at seasonal workers in the agriculture field. We also have an objective to support the wellbeing of workers and support their welfare, workplace rights and protections, and also supporting the economic growth of the participating countries, providing the workers with jobs and income and opportunities to increase their skills. As I said before, there's currently around 32,000 workers in the country. Some of these are here on short-term visas. They're here for up to 9 months, generally working in seasonal roles, and some are here for up to 4 years and generally working in more longer-term roles. Often they're in the meat processing, agriculture. Also, there are some long-term workers in agriculture, some workers in aged care, and some very small numbers in things like retail as well. If you're not familiar with our sending countries, our partner countries, there are 9 from the Pacific, so Fiji, Vanuatu, Tonga, Samoa, the Solomon Islands, Kiribati, Tuvalu, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste. So we approve employers to participate in the scheme, so they apply to the department, and we do some compliance checks on them. I'm happy to talk through that process if you like, but in a nutshell, it's making sure these employers have a history of compliance with workplace relations laws, a history of compliance with migration law, as well as they're financially viable and are able to participate in the scheme. And so those approved employers are provided a deed, and I'll talk through or offered a deed, and I'll talk through some of the changes we've made to that deed. And these are the requirements that the employers are required to provide to the workers whilst they're in Australia. I was going to also just move through some of the changes that we've gone through with the scheme. So it first started off as the Seasonal Workers Program, and then a few years later, about 6 years later, we introduced the Pacific Labour Scheme. So the Seasonal Workers, or SWP, was the short-term stream. The Pacific Labour Scheme was the long-term scheme, and we brought those together into one scheme. We called it the consolidation phase. And that began in 2022, merging those two programs together. We started to consult on what that single deed would look like. Lots of consultation with employers, with unions, with worker advocates and workers on what that new scheme, what the minimum requirements in the deed would look like. So we had about 18 months of consultation, but you remember in the time between when we were about to introduce the deed and when the new PALM visa was introduced in April 22, we had a change of government, and we weren't able to introduce the single deed at that stage, and we had an election. I think you all know the outcome of that election. We had a change of government, and we had a new minister, and we had some machinery of government changes. So the program was being brought together in one department, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and the new government decided that they would separate the strategic responsibilities to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, we'll call them DFAT, and move the operational aspects to the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, DEWA. So, and that was important to our minister, Minister Burke, because they wanted that operationalisation of the scheme to be in the department, also responsible for the workplace relations and workplace rights. So we shortly, after the government came in, the machinery of government changes took effect, and then we moved over to the new Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. We were able then to pick up those consultations on the new deed and guidelines settings, re-prosecute some of them, and make some changes, and I'll talk through some of those main changes. At the same time, we introduced a new deed that was in the middle of last year, so just over 12 months ago. We also made some changes in-house to how we administer the program. So previously we had a relationship with the Pacific Labour Facility to deliver the program and support the program onshore. Pacific PLF still support the program offshore, but onshore the government also made a change to move that consolidate the domestic delivery within the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. So we've gone from that very long title that you described before, having about, I think it was about 45 staff working on the PALM scheme. We're now up to just over, I think, about 270 staff in the department because we've moved that in. And that change has meant that now we're responsible for, you know, all the compliance and monitoring, the worker support, and also the help desk, the information line, communications product, all of those things that support the domestic delivery of the program in-house. That's not to say we still don't work closely with the Pacific Labour Facility and DFAT. We certainly do. DFAT retains the strategic oversight, and we also work with other government agencies. Department of Home Affairs has been referred to before. They have responsibility for the visa settings, and Fair Work Ombudsman has been mentioned before, and obviously their role is compliance with paying conditions, as has been mentioned. We also work with the Department of Agriculture, many other government agencies have an interest in this program. So in terms of consolidation and then the changes, we talked to many stakeholders over many months, and that included workers and their advocates, and heard about the main pain points with the program, and that led us to making some changes. And those changes included the 8 or so I'm going to run through today, but this is just some of the changes that were introduced. So we increased the minimum hours required under the scheme. So previously it was that average of 30 hours for the short-term stream, averaged over the time that they were in the country, generally 8 or 9 months. That's changed over the last 18 months, and now it's, at the moment, currently it's 30 hours of work each week, averaged over a period of 4 weeks. And just this month, earlier this month, the government also introduced a change that said if an employer cannot offer the 120 hours a week over that 4 week period, they also, the employer must pay the equivalent of the 120 hours over that 4 week period. For the long-term stream, the minimum hours changed from 30 hours a week to full-time hours a week. So again, we were hearing from stakeholders that there were workers that weren't getting the required hours, and therefore particularly the beginning of their placement and at the end of their placement, there were times when they weren't able to earn the income that were needed to, you know, support, as we heard, support families back home, to allow those remittances, and particularly at a time when a worker might be paying back some of their airfare costs or other costs to help them establish. So that was in response to that feedback that we were getting. We also recognise that there are, you know, this is Australia, it's a big country, we're at the mercy of natural disasters, so we know that sometimes there are circumstances which mean an employer can't meet that 30 hours minimum. So we have some clauses in the deed that allow us to work with the employer, redeploy a worker, and employers are required to have contingency plans. So what if a cyclone comes through? What are their contingencies so we can enact those quickly? So they're required to tell us about those contingencies when they submit that recruitment plan. Another thing the government introduced was pay parity. So we introduced pay parity into the scheme before the workplace relations changes were introduced more recently. That is pay parity now for all Australians. So we introduced it for PALM scheme workers, and what that means is if a worker's, say, employed by a labour hire, but working beside someone who's directly employed at that site, that they need to be paid the same as the person they're working beside doing the same role at that site. So that's a requirement of the PALM deed. It's since now become part of the law as well. But we were pretty proud of ourselves including that first. In terms of minimum safeguards, there's a few other minimum requirements that are included in the deed, and that is things like if there's any 1 week where an employer offers less than 20 hours of work, they need to cover the cost of the worker's accommodation and transport in that week. So if you like, it's almost a minimum threshold. And also, employers need to, and I should say for that one, if the hours do dip below 20 hours and they need to pay for the workers' accommodation and transport, they can't recoup that. So they can't take it out in later weeks when they do meet that threshold. But another safeguard is ensuring that there's a minimum of $200. So if in those first weeks when a worker is paying back some of the airfares, employers don't always recoup the airfare costs, and they're not able to recoup all of it. They must contribute at least $300 to every worker's airfare cost. But if in the time when they are accruing some of those costs back and the hours might be lower, they need to make sure that a worker has a minimum of $200. And again, that's a minimum. Some employers go higher than that. Worker portability, that was another change that was introduced, and this was introduced to provide a little bit of flexibility and allow workers to maximise their earnings. Thank you so much. I did warn you about the voice. Thank you. So again, that's where an employer either while they're onshore or before a worker has come across, an employer can come to us with a proposal to say, I'm going to have a partnership with a number of employers to maximise a worker's time in Australia and earnings while they're here, and they come to us with a proposal to have multiple placements. Or circumstances have changed while they're here and the strawberry crop is not as good as it has been in previous years or something like that, and then they'll come to us and say, we don't have the work for all of the workers that we brought, we'd like now to find alternative, and this is what they propose. And if that's approved by us in advance, they can put it into action quickly, and if that's not approved in advance, then we can take some quick assessment of it and look to make it happen as quickly as possible. Accommodation standards, we've increased those requirements in the deed as well. Under the deed, palm employers have to provide suitable accommodation for a worker for long-term stream workers for the first 12 months that they're here. It can be for the whole time, it's really up to the employer, but the minimum is the first 12 months. And for the short-term workers, they need to provide that accommodation for the whole time that they're here, their whole placement. We check the accommodation and check that it makes the minimum standards. Of course, things can change over time, and I guess we rely on workers or their advocates telling us if an accommodation no longer meets those requirements, and we'll get people out there to check that. But we also just have unannounced visits where we might, be concerned or hearing something, or we just haven't checked on it for a while and we can do those visits. I was pleased to hear over morning tea about one of those accommodation checks that happened in the field. Something else we've introduced is the grievance management process. So this, and I think there was a question before from Christine asking about how do we hear about the concerns that a worker's facing, and rather than going through the formal, find a lawyer or have a conversation with a professional in terms of solving that. We have a hotline, 1800 51 51 31, and we encourage workers to call us, or their advocates to call us, or a member of the community can call us, and we can investigate that claim. Of course, we also encourage employers to have a relationship with the workers so that they're having those conversations. If a worker doesn't understand their deductions, that they can feel comfortable in having those conversations and asking for an explanation. But we're realists, we know that doesn't always happen, so hence why we have a hotline and a process where employers need to keep a record of the grievances raised with them. They have to show us how they've been resolved, and if they haven't, again, that's a requirement of the deed that they're not meeting. And I can talk through about, some of our compliance processes as well. So when we hear that an employer might not be meeting, what we do to investigate that. And that could be things like referring it to the Fair Work Ombudsman. It can be our own compliance team. It can be those visits, etc. That I talked about. And then, of course, we can issue a breach notice or take other sorts of compliance actions, ultimately giving an employer, in some cases, the opportunity to fix it, or we pursue further actions and talk about them no longer having approval to recruit and the privilege to host palm workers whilst they're in Australia. Just quickly, 2 more things. The Welfare and Wellbeing Support Person. We did have something similar under the Seasonal Workers Program, but it's new for the long-term stream, and that is a requirement for employers to have a go-to person that looks after, that's responsible for ensuring the wellbeing and welfare of workers, and that's someone that workers can talk to, someone that advocates can talk to, and can help them connect with community. Cultural competency is the last thing I'll talk about before I hand over to Fiona. And so this is a requirement for employers to demonstrate that they have some level of cultural competency for the countries that they recruit from, so that the owner, the manager, the supervisor, the people that are working with workers day to day have some appreciation and knowledge of the culture. Obviously, the more you know about the people you employ, the more likely you're going to have a good working relationship. More likely the workers are going to be happy and feel part of that workplace. And it's a win-win ultimately for a workplace. So I'm going to hand over, think about your questions, and of course I'm happy to take them, Fiona and I, but that's just some of the changes we've made. I'm going to hand over now to Fiona, who's going to talk through our response and the way we handle worker support. Thank you.
Thanks, Cary. I believe this is on. So many thanks to all of you for inviting us to come and talk a bit about our work. I think Cary and I saw this as an opportunity to lift the lid a bit on the day-to-day operations of the scheme. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the lines of effort that we have operationally in the worker support section in the PALM scheme, and then I'll talk a bit more about some of the things that we're worried about and sort of lines, areas of future work for us. We're also going to talk about some research that's come through recently from the ANU where workers are talking about their experience, and then finish up with some community engagement work that we're doing at the moment. So, and very much open to questions and dialogue around this. I've been in this role for about 12 months. It's been a wicked ride. I'm part of a relatively small team of about 20 of us that was set up as a unit within the DUA space as part of that insourcing work that Cary described earlier. We are a team of specialist staff, so social workers, psychs, community development professionals, and so on, many of whom have previous experience working with the PALM scheme, so a lot of our former colleagues from PLF came over. Similarly, we've, in recruiting staff, I very much targeted people with hospital health, education, industrial relations and community development experience as well. So when we talk about looking at worker support and ensuring the welfare and wellbeing of workers within the scheme, we're really trying to chunk it up into different domains. This is a very complicated program with a whole range of different risks and issues that we are responding to. So to that end, we have foundational activities that Cary went a long way towards describing, so the deed and guideline requirements, the worker grievance mechanism that we have in place, the assurance and monitoring activity that she described, and I think it's really important to talk about health insurance and access to healthcare for workers within the scheme as a condition of their visa. Our PALM workers are required to have health insurance. We have at the moment a single preferred provider, NIB, that we have a memorandum of understanding with that defines the policy inclusions, the rate that workers pay, and also mandates, I'm going to use the word extracurricular work that NIB is required to do to really build the health literacy and overall health and wellbeing of workers within the scheme. I think it's really important to say that it's not mandatory for workers to have their health insurance with NIB, and there is work underway by Cary's team to look at what the future state looks like in terms of whether we have a panel of providers and so on and so forth. But that, we'll talk about it a little bit later in some of the more acute work, but that relationship with the health insurance provider and the way in which workers can access healthcare, particularly in emergency situations, is really important to the day-to-day work of my team. We have a proactive stream of work, and Community Connections is a specific scheme that we have within the PALM program. I'm really pleased to see Randall, and I think Mark Zersnak is here today to talk later about the specific work of that program, but that in essence is a artefact or a program that we have in place that really looks to connect PALM workers to supports and resources within their host communities, with a focus on faith-based activities, sporting, cultural, and so on. We have, building on the work of PLF and in close collaboration with NIB, historically there's been a lot of work done in health promotion, community education activity. Historically that's focused on topics such as mental health, sexual and reproductive health, a bit of driver safety awareness and so on as well. When the scheme came into DUA, to comply with Commonwealth procurement guidelines, because nothing's ever simple, we've gone through a process of establishing a panel of providers that we can use to deliver that training within the PALM schemes over the next couple of years. So we've just completed that panel, and we'll be working on develop a forward calendar of training activities for PALM workers, and also supporting the capability of those welfare wellbeing officers that Cary described as well, that sit within the approved employers. We have a line of effort around disaster preparedness, and I'm not talking about personal disasters for PALM workers, but rather really, I'm really acutely conscious that our workers are living and working in regional, remote, rural parts of Australia that are enormously vulnerable to natural disasters. We're keeping a watching brief on the avian flu situation and so on. So part of the work of my team has to establish a capability internally to maintain a bit of situational awareness as to what's going on as a potential threat to workers and the scheme more generally, and then the capability to stand up a crisis response if we need to. We have we have a research and evaluation unit within our division that works closely with academics and other bodies to really try and learn and iterate on our work within the scheme as well. And there is a skills development segment of the scheme, which I'm, to my shame, only really starting to learn a bit about. And I think this is an area that I'm personally quite interested in pursuing, particularly when, in the wake of the really tragic bus accident in Mildura a couple of weeks back, which came off the back of the really awful car accident in Mansfield at the end of last year. Driver safety and awareness for PALM workers is a risk and issue for us. There are requirements under the DENA guidelines for employers to provide PALM workers with driver safety awareness, and where workers have driving responsibilities, specific training and so on. But the skills development program provides a mechanism for approved employers to access funding for that. So really there's like no excuses, right? It's a no-brainer for me. When we play in the responsive and reactive space, which is really my world on a day-to-day basis, our starting point is the critical incident notification mechanism. Now, the deed and guidelines has really strict requirements on approved employers within the scheme, requiring them to alert the department in the event of a critical incident impacting a worker. Now, I don't have the definitions to hand, but a critical incident are the things that you'd expect them to be. The death of a worker, serious illness, injury of a worker, regardless of whether it happened in the workplace or not. We also require them to let us know if there's been a death, serious incident or illness to somebody other than a worker in their workplace, which is significant from a work safety perspective. They're required to let us know if a worker has been the victim of a crime or if the worker has been arrested or involved with the police in relation to a crime. And then there's a kind of catch-all. If something has happened that puts the scheme, the employer, the program, under threat or reputational risk, and so on. So employers are required to let us know if something like it's happened as soon as they know, no less than 24 hours. Yeah. I should also be clear that they're also required to let us know about non-critical incidents as well, so a minor injury or illness, a range of other criteria, but they've got a 3-day period within which to do that. And so what happens when a critical incident notification comes through to my team is that we do a little bit of work to try and work out what on earth is going on. There's often quite a gap in the information that we get, and we do a bit of fact-checking as well. It's my team that alerts your country liaison officers, the heads of mission, and the labour sending units in sending countries that something's happened, impacted a worker, and we do that so we can mobilise supports for that person. And then there's work that happens with the approved employer to kind of make safe, remediate the situation, and so on. Some situations are very complicated, and in those circumstances, I have a specific team that steps in to provide complex case coordination. And so that is, a version of case management where we're recognising that workers don't have access to Medicare, they don't have access to Social Security, they don't have immediate access to a range of supports that in Australia we take for granted. And so often there's quite a lot of work that needs to happen to make sure that appropriate supports are put in place. Where things can get very, very complicated is where a worker is unable to work, either because they are unwell, so if a worker's been diagnosed with cancer and needs to receive treatment over a number of months. Similarly, if a worker has been arrested and is facing criminal justice charges, the nature of their crime alleged crime, might mean that their employer feels unable to employ them and terminates their employment. Now we have a situation where we've got an individual who's got no earning ability, who's unable to leave the country because they're facing criminal justice charges and have a pending court matter. So that can get really, really messy really quickly. And so we work very closely with country liaison officers, with the approved employer where the employer is still involved, with local services, with our colleagues in community connections, with a lot of the faith-based organisations to try and mobilise support to keep that person safe and in place. I think it's not within my space, but I need to acknowledge the work of compliance investigations in responding to those acute situations. And then finally, off the back of that disaster preparedness, we have a crisis response capability. So the Air Vanuatu grounding was an example of a situation where we stood up a crisis response team to really rapidly understand what was happening, map out the impacts directly to workers, and working with approved employers to make sure that workers either had an alternate pathway home, or we worked quite closely with Home Affairs to adjust visa settings and allow workers to be re-engaged in work while alternate flights home were organised. Now, I want to be really clear that we haven't cracked it yet. It's work in progress. I have a team of incredible practitioners that leave me for dead, which is a good thing, because in reflecting on the complex casework, like, I've been a social worker for over 20 years and I have never seen the complexity of cases that I have within this context, you know, and I think that ethical challenges that my team are dealing with on a daily basis are, you know, require a great deal of skill, a great deal of personal resilience, and so on as well, and also like the resilience and needs of the worker at the centre of that as well, right? So it is very much a work in progress. We have make a point of really trying to engage in this kind of dialogue to understand how we can be doing better, and so on as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So, priorities and issues, or the things that keeps Fiona awake at night. Gender-based violence is an area of concern for us, and so you haven't been paying attention if you've not kind of recognised that it's an area of concern for the Australian community at large. Anyway, there is a significant rate of gender-based violence that exists within Pacifica countries already. There are higher rates of violence against women. We do see that manifest within the scheme, either in worker-on-worker violence. We see incidents where female workers experience violence either from other workers or from non-workers, or we get a great deal of media reporting and so on instances where palm workers are facing charges to do with gender-based violence within the community. That dovetails into the question of criminal justice matters, which I alluded to a little bit in terms of the complexity that can create on an individual worker level. Sexual and reproductive health is also an area that requires more work. We do, and I think it's been Akrath as well that's spoken to me previously about concerns involving women who either come into the program already pregnant or become pregnant over here. The settings from a health insurance perspective means that pregnancy is not, workers aren't eligible for OBGYN services in the first 12 months of their health insurance policy in the same way it is for mainstream Australians. That can get very complicated. We do work quite closely with NIB and have, where workers have talked to us about what's going on and remained engaged in the scheme, have actually been able to navigate that in such a way that we've been able to secure care for women. One of the things that does happen though is that a woman who becomes pregnant and is fearful of the implications of that is quite likely to disengage and put themselves at enormous risk. Or, sorry, that's not right. They're not putting themselves at risk, but they become in a really high-risk situation. Serious illness I touched on as well. The sector mapping and engagement is a reflection of that this is a new service. Oh, I've got to hurry up. Right. And I think just acknowledging as well the work of Cary, that Cary's leading in terms of a disengagement task force to look at levers that we have to prevent disengagement. I think that's not all I had to say, but I can stop there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's really important in these sessions to be able to hear from you and have some questions and dialogue. So I'm just going to give you a quick minute to talk to the person next to you to identify something that you've heard that stood out, and if there's a question that you want to ask the panel. So we'll just take a very quick moment to do that because I'd really like to hear some questions and comments from the floor. Go. Sorry about that. I just
It's just so interesting. Oh, no, I we're teaching.
Very technical social work cases, huh? Yeah. Very complicated. Where are you based?
Who's got mics? I like the mics. So thank you for it. I can already see a couple of hands up. So let's see if we can answer some questions. Just over the back corner, if you can get there. Far away.
Hi everyone, my name is Carla. I'm working with ACMRO and I'm the seasonal worker support person here. I have lots of questions to ask, but I'm going to cut it into a very important one. I'm following the presentation between Fiona and Cary. One of my questions first is says that workers are getting up to 9 months contract. Up to what would be the minimum allowed contract? I have come across workers who are on 3 months contract, short term. They haven't even finished. They kind of just literally just finished paying off their deductions, and they have to go home. So which literally they are not meeting the intention of why they're coming here to make money and to support their family, because as you and I understand that during the deduction time, they're probably getting, before it was $150, now it's $200. What I want to put the reality out there so everybody understand is, if somebody who has a family minimum of 2 children, if they are getting $150 or $200 a week, how much can they use to buy their groceries? How much can they save, and how much can they send back home to their wife or husband and their 2 children? Like, that's minimum. That's my first question, though. But I have another question.
Oh, look, we just need to stick to the one question at the moment because there's several others, and I'll just let Cary respond to that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. We generally won't approve a recruitment plan under 7 months. That's our minimum, and 9 is the maximum. So it's generally between that. So I guess I'd be keen to discuss the case of the 3 months, unless of course it's 2 or 3 different contracts that the employer has developed a partnership with another employer to sort of package up, for want of a better word, an offering that's going to see a net financial benefit. So that's the lens we put over a recruitment plan before we approve it. Is there a net financial benefit, or we won't approve it? I guess it's also another step in the process is a labour sending unit deciding that they will fill that ask from the employer. So we kind of have 2 steps in the process. One, whether we approve that the recruitment could happen, and another, should workers or the labour sending unit choose to take up that and fill that ask.
Thank you. There was a question just straight in front of you there as well.
Hi everyone, James Cockayne, New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner. My question, I think, focuses on disengaged people. I feel like maybe ran a little bit out of time there at the end to talk about that. To me, these are amongst the most vulnerable people. So my question is really, what supports are available from PALM, through PALM, for people who have disengaged rather than for the people who are still in the program? And why is PALM excluded from the worker justice visa?
2 very good questions. In terms of support for disengaged workers, we definitely encourage them to call us and talk about their needs, and for some that's about re-engaging in the program. So depending on how long is left on their visa, we'll often work with the worker and sometimes their original employer if they're comfortable, and sometimes a different employer to get them back into the program. So we have a fair bit of success if a worker calls us or the advocate calls us in terms of again, depending on the number of weeks or months left on their visa, to re-engage them in the program, and that's certainly a good outcome for us and the worker.
In the meantime, there's no income support?
That's right. Yeah, no, that's not eligible for income support as Australians are. In terms of why the provisions about finding aren't, I mean, I guess the short answer is that's a question for Home Affairs. In saying that, we've made some improvements to the program, or I should say the government's made some improvements to the program, but I think, as Fiona said, I think our improvements haven't stopped and the job's not done. I think we're going in the right direction, but I think we still, have some way to go. So, hearing from you guys, it's an ongoing conversation that will feed this back to our conversations with DFAT and Home Affairs, and look at what else we can change to improve the program.
Thank you. There's just two other questions. There's one here and you've got another one there, Ryan.
Hello, my name is Jack. I'm the parish priest of Childers in Queensland, and that place is 20% of our parishioners are seasonal workers, working in sugarcane farms as well as fruit picking. Recently, I began a conversation with our parishioners at large about the pastoral care to seasonal workers, and I was told in writing that essentially, because workers are hired for only a few years, they are not concerned with being part of a community. Just working to send money home and living together in their house communities is all they need. They do not need to be welcomed and included in the town. Now, I was shocked, and this email has sat in my inbox for 3 days. I haven't responded because I don't even have the language to begin to respond to an email like this. And so this is really a question for Archbishop Prowse. You spoke beautifully earlier about the pastoral care to our seasonal workers, about because you did it to me, and I was really touched by that. My question, I suppose, is as a new pastor in our parish, what are some of the first steps that I can take to start to engage the parish in this topic and allow our seasonal workers to be seen and to be heard, allow their stories to come through the community, and allow their identity to be celebrated, whether it's in their language, whether it's in their culture, whether it's special feast days for patron saints and other elements of their life. Thank you.
Thank you, Father, and congratulations on becoming a new parish priest in an area where the Lord is there in a hidden way, and that you're here to sensitise yourself onto this. Well, the answer is standing in front of us, sitting in front of us. I think the idea is seasonal workers are no longer to be seen as invisible seasonal workers. They are visible seasonal workers. And many of them are from very strong Christian, in some cases Catholic backgrounds, especially East Timorese, and they will be coming to your parish. When they do come to your parish, will they be welcomed? Will they be sitting down the back, shivering, English second language, or will they be seen as our new parishioners? That's a very disturbing email you've got there, and I wish you well as you respond. But respond you must, because that's a very bitter and hard understanding of what gospel is. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to finish. Time is up. But I know dialogue is something that we need to focus on and make sure we have a lot more of over the next few days. Each speaker is here during the breaks, so there is more discussion to be had. But it is lunchtime. I'm going to invite Kylie up now to conclude our session.